How can a person be here one day and then completely gone the next? The topic of missing persons is at once both intriguing and horrifying. I'm your host, Leah.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Steve. Today we're going to investigate some baffling cases of missing persons.
If you have an appetite for the strange and bizarre, then pull up a chair and grab a spoon for another intriguing serving of Remnant Stew. Remnant Stew is gluten-free, organic, made from all natural, free-range ingredients, and guaranteed to provide the recommended daily serving of curiosity.
According to a website called en.as.com, as of February 21st, 2023, there are 22,740 unsolved missing persons in the United States alone. This figure comes from the Department of Justice, which maintains the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System.
That's a lot of people.
22,000. It really is.
That is a lot of people.
The article further breaks the number of missing persons down by state. And, of course, the states with the largest populations, California, Texas, and Florida, have the most, which is understandable. Surprisingly, Alaska, the state with the smallest population, is fourth on the list.
Oh, okay.
But there's a lot of places to get lost and go missing.
You can get lost. A lot of polar bears and grizzly bears in Alaska.
And never be found in Alaska.
Visitors, take your buddy.
We talked on this topic a little bit a few months ago in our National Parks episode.
Yeah, that was good. That was season 4, episode 3.
That's right.
Yeah.
In particular, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park has seen a string of people seeming to vanish into thin air.
Yeah, it was weird.
Like Alaska, our national parks do offer ample opportunities to disappear by falling into a crevice, being eaten by a bear or an alligator.
Yeah,
but some of the other cases of missing persons appear to have absolutely no explanation whatsoever. And we're going to touch on some of these today.
Well, when I think of missing persons, there's one that immediately comes to mind.
Uh-huh.
Now, we're going to take a cue from our virtual mentor, Mike Rowe, today, and present the information without telling you at first who we are talking about, and see if you can guess. Oh, I'm going to do the Mike Rowe little intro jingle. Yeah. Bum, 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 chang!
And everyone's now looking that up.
That is from the podcast. What is it? That's the way I heard it.
The way I heard it. Yeah.
Yes.
I love that. I love
I'm
Mike
a fan.
Rowe.
I'm a fan
big
too.
fan of Mike Rowe.
Yep.
Well, the following information comes from Britannica.com. This person was born in 1913 in Brazil. No, not that Brazil. I'm talking about Brazil, Indiana. I bet you didn't even know there was such a place.
I really didn't.
His father was a coal miner, but died when our subject was only 7 years old. So then his family moved to the Detroit area, where, after dropping out of school at the age of 14, he became a stock boy and then a warehouseman. The workers in these positions often faced dangerous working conditions and were paid low wages. There was little to no job security. Sensing his co-workers' frustration, our gentleman at the tender age of 18 began to organize them into labor unions in an attempt to gain better working conditions. The results were not greatly successful, but his engaging personality helped his popularity to spread among laborers throughout Detroit. In 1932, at the age of 19, he was invited to become an organizer with the local Teamsters Union of Detroit. Working with other leaders, he managed to consolidate local truck drivers and warehouse workers into one large regional union. In just 3 years under his leadership, the Teamsters grew from 75,000 members to 170,000.
Oh, wow.
And became a powerful force for workers in the Midwest. With the advent of World War II came the opportunity for organizing these workers on a national scale. By 1950, the Teamsters Union boasted more than 1 million members and became one of the most powerful labor unions in the United States. Our gentleman became the president of this union in 1957. But in the rough and tumble world of labor union politics, you can't advance by being a rule follower. And as Garth Brooks might tell you, it's also helpful to have some friends in low places.
Mm-hmm.
This gentleman's reputation as a person who sometimes smudged the rules and dined with known crime bosses drew the attention of federal authorities. When President Kennedy was elected in 1960, his younger brother Bobby became the Attorney General of the United States. Robert Kennedy appeared to have a severe dislike for this gentleman, and he went about looking for dirt. He didn't really have to look very hard. In 1964, he was convicted in Nashville of conspiracy, jury tampering, and attempting to bribe a grand juror. He was given an 8-year sentence and a $10,000 fine. While out on bail during his appeal, he was also convicted in Chicago for mail and wire fraud and improper use of the Teamsters Pension Fund. For this, he was given an additional 5 years in prison. This is an aside, but I love the name of his attorney. His attorney's name is Morris Schenker, Schenker. I can say, get me Schenker on the phone. He began serving his time in 1967, and of course, by now...
Wait, do you know who it is?
Yes.
Have you guessed?
Oh, yeah, he's buried in my backyard.
Oh, now we know. Well, if you haven't guessed by now, I'm referring to none other than Jimmy Hoffa. Hoffa attempted to control the Teamsters Union while behind bars, but his hand-picked successor didn't always cooperate. Then in 1971,
Well,
President...
that would be a chip off the old block. I mean,
Yeah,
really,
right.
if you're
Could
going to
be,
smudge it, he's going to smudge it.
Right. And then in 1971, President Nixon pardoned Hoffa, but he made him promise to keep away from labor union activity up until 1980. Hoffa replied, quote, "What do you think I am, a crook? I am not a crook." Okay,
Yeah,
I just made that part
you
up.
made that up.
Uh-huh.
That's right.
It would have been cool had it actually happened, as Nixon actually said those same words himself about a year later. Well, though Hoffa officially kept his nose clean, behind the scenes he was trying to gain control of the Teamsters Union once again. He was opposed in his efforts by members of organized crime. A peaceful luncheon was arranged on July 30th, 1975, between Hoffa and Anthony Provenzano, the mob boss from New Jersey, who was opposing him. The luncheon had been arranged at a Detroit area restaurant by two local mobsters, Tony and Vito Giacolone. And no, I'm not making that up. Vito Giacolone. The lunch meeting was set for 2 p.m., but at 2:30 p.m., Hoffa called his wife from a payphone outside the restaurant and said that the others had never showed up. He told her that he would be coming home and he would grill some steaks. Jimmy Hoffa was never seen or heard from again. His body has never been found. When Hoffa did not return home that day, his wife called their son, Jimmy Hoffa Jr. He went to the restaurant, found his dad's unlocked car, but no sign of his father. The police were called. One witness said that they thought they saw him getting into the back of a maroon Mercury Marquis with some other men. It just so happened that Tony Giacolone's son, Joseph, owned such a car. But on the day of the disappearance, the car had been borrowed by a mutual acquaintance of theirs, one Chucky O'Brien, and Chucky borrowed it to deliver fish.
Oh.
Because, everyone delivers fish in a Mercury Marquis. Nothing to see here.
And borrow a cart to deliver fish. And I'm thinking deliver fish might have something to do with being at the bottom of the river.
Yeah,
Could be.
You're going to swim with them.
Yeah.
Well, the fish scent wasn't enough to throw police scent dogs off the track, as during the investigation, they consistently indicated that Hoffa's scent was in the vehicle. The police suspected that the organized crime families decided to stop Jimmy Hoffa from regaining control of the Teamsters by making him disappear.
Concrete shoes.
However, the main players, Anthony Provenzano and Tony and Vito Giacolone, all had ironclad alibis and good documentation that they were not in Detroit that day.
Bought and paid for.
Mm-hmm. Most likely, Hoffa was murdered by other mob operatives, and the body was cremated either in Michigan or back in New Jersey, though there was several dozen theories about what happened to him. Including that his body is buried in the cement of the New York Giants football stadium, which was under construction at the time. Only a handful of people actually know what happened to him, and they ain't talking.
That's right. And did you cite your source from? It was from Britannica?
Britannica.com, yes.
Right. Well, we couldn't talk about strange cases of missing people without mentioning Bobby Dunbar.
All right.
Oh, wow.
Bobby went missing on August 23rd, 1912, while on a trip with his family to Swayze Lake in Louisiana. He was just 4 years old, and his parents, Leslie and Percy Dunbar, were frantic. They looked for him everywhere. When their search turned up nothing, they called the police.
I just like the name Swayze Lake, Louisiana. It's so musical.
I know,
somehow.
right? An exhaustive statewide search was immediately launched by the local authorities as well as the state police. They left no stone unturned as they caught and dissected alligators,
Oh, wow.
looking for the remains, and they threw dynamite in the lake hoping to make the body rise to the surface.
Well, that doesn't do it. I don't know what.
Right.
They should have called those swamp people.
Right.
But all to no avail. They never found any trace of little Bobby. But then, 8 months after the disappearance, a boy matching Bobby's description was found in Mississippi with a traveling handyman named William Cantwell. Actually, I think that's a typo. I think it's Cantrell Walters.
Cantrell Walters, okay.
When questioned by police, Walters said that the boy was Charles Bruce Anderson, his nephew.
Oh.
He claimed that the boy's mother had left him in his care while she looked for work. Many people in the town backed up that story, but the police were convinced that this was Bobby Dunbar and took the boy into custody and arrested Walters.
Wow.
They may have been swayed by the fact that Walters didn't have steady employment, as well as his claim that the boy was the illegitimate son of his brother, kind of a tenuous connection at best.
Yeah.
While one account indicated that the boy immediately shouted, "Mother," upon seeing her and then the two embraced, another said only that the boy cried and quoted Leslie Dunbar as saying that she was unsure whether or not he was her son.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Another
Interesting.
newspaper accounts...
Well, how long ago between...
Like three months?
It was 3 months.
Just 3 months.
It was
Yeah.
just 3 months.
Yeah.
And the mom's not sure that it's him?
Well, okay, see,
Interesting.
here's the
Okay.
deal. This was a huge media frenzy.
Right.
Yeah.
And some newspapers were saying that he immediately recognized his mother and she recognized him and everything was
That's a good
happy and it
spin
was
on the
joyous.
story, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And then others
We're like, we're not...
Happy
were-
ending.
Yeah.
had different accounts.
Wow.
Other newspaper accounts both quote both the Dunbars as initially stating doubts as to the boy's identity. So
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
they were all over the place.
Right.
Yeah.
It was also reported that after taking the boy home and bathing him, Mrs. Dunbar was then convinced it was her son because of certain moles and scars on his body.
Hmm.
Well, a few days after the Dunbars took their son home, a woman named Julia Anderson showed up at the police station claiming that the boy was in fact her son and backed up the story that she had allowed Walters to watch him for a few days while she looked for work. Those days, though, had turned into months as she still had not been able to find a job.
Wow.
Wow. She's gone a long time.
So
Mom.
the police collected the little boy and placed him in a lineup for Anderson to identify, but she was unable to, and so she was
Oh.
sent home. Anderson showed back up to the police station the next day, though, insisting that the boy was her son. And you got to understand, he's a toddler,
Mm-hmm.
and she hadn't seen him in months, maybe.
Yeah.
Could be. Yeah, they can change. It can
Right.
grow.
Her initial hesitation convinced the police, though, that she was not the mother, and they returned the boy to the Dunbars, convinced he was, in fact, the missing Bobby Dunbar. Unable to pay a court battle to pursue her case, Miss Anderson was forced to give up and return home empty-handed.
Wow.
The Dunbars settled into their family life with little Bobby playing happily with his brothers and seeming to remember things about his house and life before the disappearance. He
Right.
thrived, grew up, he got married, eventually having 4 children of his own before his death in 1966. He, of course, had been told about the events of his early childhood and always maintained that he knew exactly who he was, and that was Bobby Dunbar.
Okay.
Wow.
But that's
Uh-oh.
not the end of the story.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Bobby's children were well acquainted with their dad's curious story and decided to look into it further to finally put to rest any question that their dad was a Dunbar.
Right.
In 2004, Bob Dunbar Jr. consented to a DNA test.
Dun,
It
dun,
was compared to
dun.
the DNA from his cousin, the son of Bobby Dunbar's younger brother.
Right.
So
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
It should have been similar, right?
I think you can guess the results, or
I
we
would
wouldn't be
say
talking
no.
about that. The test concluded that Bob Dunbar Jr. was not blood related to any of the Dunbar family. And so, of course, neither was his dad.
Wow.
Wow.
The Anderson family and the Walters family were both informed and very happy to be vindicated in their stories.
Right.
Walters had actually done prison time.
Oh.
Shoot.
He was in prison for 2 years for the kidnapping of Bobby Dunbar before the conviction was overturned.
Wow.
It's interesting to note that when the information about the DNA results came out, the Anderson family came forward with stories of how Bobby Dunbar had visited with them on a couple of occasions. So it's, he was passing through town and stopped and talked to
say
them.
hello? Wow.
So it's unclear of how convinced he really was of his parentage. In the end, the mystery still remains of what actually happened to the real little Bobby Dunbar. As so many years have passed, it's likely to always remain an unsolved mystery, but the Dunbar family thinks it's probable that the little boy fell into Swayze Lake during the fishing trip and was eaten by an alligator.
Yeah.
And I got my information from allthat'sinteresting.com as well as Wikipedia.
You know, it brings up an interesting point about the reliability of children's testimony. 30 years ago, I know in the counseling field and the legal field, it was thought that, you know, if children gave a testimony, then it was ironclad, 100 proof, you know, certain. But then there's been some research that, you know, they would take children and, you know, that doctor would come in and examine them, and then somebody would come in and ask them, okay, what did the doctor do? Well, they would say he did all kinds of things that the doctor didn't actually do. You know, so you can't always,
right.
Even though he said he's kind of familiar with the house, but, you know, he could have been just making that up as he's going along, too.
Right,
so,
right. Or just trying to make the best, you know. He was a scared little boy. Right.
Making the best of the situation. That's
exactly.
an interesting story. Well, from a website called thelineup.com, that's THE-LINE-UP.com, we learned about the strange disappearance of a young college student named Paula Jean Weldon. In December of 1946, Paula was a sophomore student at picturesque Bennington College in the quaint, quiet town of Bennington, Vermont. On the afternoon of December 1st, 1946, Paula had finished her shift working at the college dining hall and then returned to her room. She told her roommate, Elizabeth Johnson, quote, "I'm all done with my studies. I'm going on a long walk." According to Johnson, Paula was dressed in a distinctive red parka coat with a fur-lined hood, blue jeans, topsider shoes with thick soles, and a gold Elgin wristwatch with a black band. She indicated that she was planning to walk a section of Vermont's Long Trail, a hiking trail that traverses the state from Massachusetts to the Canadian border. Around 3 p.m., a truck driver picked up a young hitchhiker who matched Paula's description. She asked to be dropped off at a trailhead on Route 9. About 4 p.m., another man said he saw her at the beginning of the trail. He advised her not to travel into the mountains unless she had heavier clothing, but she proceeded to the trail anyway. When Paula did not return by dinner, her roommate Elizabeth began to worry. When she didn't return by morning, Elizabeth notified the college president. A call was made to Paula's parents in Connecticut to see if she had returned to her home. Paula's mother collapsed when she heard that she was missing. Her father immediately drove to Bennington and sprang into action, organizing a search party. Local residents and students were incorporated into search parties, which combed the long trail looking for any sign of Paula, but nothing was found. Vermont did not have a state police at the time. In fact, it was the case of Paula Weldon that caused Vermont to form a state police the following year.
Oh, interesting.
Anyway, her father called the Connecticut and New York state police for assistance, and a helicopter was brought in to fly over the trail. Several false leads were reported, including one from a waitress in Falls River, Massachusetts, who claimed to have served dinner to a disturbed woman, fitting Paula's description. For some reason, Paula's father drove to Falls River to investigate this lead without telling anyone where he was going. During the 2 days he was gone, some in Bennington began to suspect that he might have some involvement with her disappearance. These suspicions became even stronger when it was revealed that Paula and her father had recently had a falling out over a boyfriend that he disapproved of. Mr. Weldon himself promoted the idea that this boyfriend must have had some hand in Paula's disappearance. After 2 weeks with no clues, the search was called off. Heavy snow was accumulating, making it likely that any evidence or remains would be obscured. But new efforts the following spring resulted in nothing. So what happened to Paula Jean Weldon? Did she die from exposure? Was she eaten by a bear or another wild animal? Did she run off to Canada to join her boyfriend? Or was she a victim of the so-called Bennington Triangle?
What? I've never heard of that.
You see, Paula's was the second of 5 missing persons to occur in the Bennington area between 1945 and 1950.
Oh, wow.
Officially, the case remains open and is unlikely to ever be solved. So, as I said, Paula Weldon was the second of the 5 unsolved missing persons in the Bennington area. According to a website called coolinterestingstuff.com, the first the first was the case of a gentleman named Mitty Rivers, Middie. That's a cool name. Mitty.
Yeah.
Hey, Mitty. Mitty Rivers. Mr. Rivers, age 74, was an experienced hunter and fisherman. On November 12, 1945, he was guiding a group of 4 hunters on a trek into the area of the Long Trail. This was an area Rivers was very familiar with, as he had lived nearby most of his life.
And that's the same trail. That's
Same
the same
trail,
trail.
Same
Yeah.
trail. Interesting.
At one point along the way, Rivers was scouting out ahead of the group and then was never seen again. An extensive search was conducted, and the only evidence discovered was a single rifle cartridge that was found in a small stream. Speculation was that Rivers had leaned over and the cartridge had dropped out of his pocket into the water. No trace of Mitty Rivers has ever been located.
So wait a minute. He was guiding 4 other hunters
Right.
ahead of them,
Right.
and he just vanished.
And he vanished, yeah.
And the other 4 hunters did not
They
see
made
him.
it back. Yeah, they made it back. And they
Now,
don't know
we
where he went.
covered a lot of stories like that when we talked about national parks.
Agreed. I'm
It
just like,
happens.
that's crazy.
So then, here's another one. On October 12th, 1950, 8-year-old Paul Jeffson was riding along in a farm truck with his mother. The mother parked the truck on their farm and walked to feed some pigs that were penned in a remote location. Paul's mother told him to stay in the truck until she returned, and that it might be a while. About an hour later, when Paul's mother came back to the truck, Paul was gone. Vermont's new state police brought bloodhounds in to assist in the search for Paul. The hounds indicated that Paul had walked to a nearby highway, but then the scent disappeared. It happened to be at the same stretch of highway where Paula Weldon was dropped off by the truck driver 4 years before. Paul Jeffson has never been located. Then, about 2 weeks later, on October 28, 1950, a 53-year-old woman named Frida Langer and her cousin Herbert Elsner were on a camping trip with other family members at Somerset Reservoir near Bennington. They decided to take a walk, but shortly Frida slipped and fell into a stream. She asked Herbert to wait for her while she returned to the campsite to change into dry clothes. When she didn't return, Herbert came back to the campsite and discovered that she had never made it back and that no one had seen her. Over the next 2 weeks, several searches were conducted involving aircraft, helicopters, and up to 300 volunteers. Nothing. No trace of clothing, signs of struggle, or anything was located to indicate what happened to Frida.
Wow.
But then, on May 12, 1951, Frida's body was located by hikers in an area that had been thoroughly searched in the weeks following her disappearance. Cause of death could not be determined because of the deteriorated condition of her remains. Of the 5 Bennington missing persons, hers is the only remains to be found. Now, if you've been counting, you will note that we have only covered 4 of the 5 Bennington, Vermont missing persons. The 5th may be the strangest of all, and may also contain a 6th missing person as well, but we're going to make you wait for this one just a little bit.
And now for something completely off topic and off kilter. Brace yourself for the oddity du jour.
I love spaghetti, don't you?
Yay! Me too.
I like spaghetti and almost all Italian
Mamma
food
mia.
so much. So my family sometimes gets sick of pasta. I think that's how residents of a certain New Jersey neighborhood felt when hundreds of pounds of pasta were found to be dumped in a nearby wooded area earlier this year.
A pasta dump.
Yes.
Wow.
According to
Somebody lost their
NPR.org,
noodles.
Mm-hmm.
workers in Old Bridge Township found 15 wheelbarrow loads of illegally dumped pasta along a creek in a residential neighborhood.
I didn't know dumping pasta was illegal, but okay.
Well, I think dumping that much.
Yeah.
is. The pasta was estimated to weigh around 300 or 400 pounds and
Oh.
ranged from your regular spaghetti noodles to macaroni noodles.
Oh, okay.
In spite of being kind of funny, the pasta is a source of possible contamination to the nearby water.
Oh.
Okay. Starchy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
You don't want all
Too
of
much
that in
starch
there.
in your water is not good.
Yeah.
There's some speculation as to whether the pasta was cooked or if it was pulled dry out of the packages and dumped raw at the location, growing soft in the weather conditions. In either case, the authorities were not amused
Oh.
and are still trying to find out who threw out the noodles.
Wow.
And again, got my information from NPR.org.
What was that Robin Williams movie called Patch Adams? You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
And there was one of his patients that she had a fantasy about swimming in a big bucket of noodles, and so maybe there was somebody like that, you know.
That's right.
They had
That's
to
what
get rid
were
of it
trying to do.
somewhere, so
Yeah,
they
had to get-
decided to dump it
Might have
there.
been left over from the movie. You never know.
And we're back.
Yay!
Dun, dun, dun.
Well, now let's get to that 5th disappearance from the Bennington, Vermont area. James E. Tedford. He was born around 1884, when no one's quite sure of the exact birth date or the details of his early life. But in 1940, he shows up on the census as residing in Franklin, Vermont, age 56, with his wife Pearl, age 28. Yeah, it's a little bit of a twice difference there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Evidently, James was a World War I veteran, but when World War II broke out, he was called back into the reserves. When James returned to Vermont in 1945, Pearl was nowhere to be found.
Oh.
The house they rented together was abandoned. Someone had seen her walking toward the Amico store, but beyond that, there was no trace of Pearl. After exhausting his resources looking for Pearl, James took residence in a soldier's home in Bennington, Vermont.
Oh.
3 years later, in November of 1949, James boarded a Greyhound bus to St. Albans, Vermont, to spend Thanksgiving with extended family. A few days later, his family members drove him to the bus station and put him on the bus for the return trip to Bennington. Several other passengers stated that they watched James get on the bus in St. Albans, take a seat, and promptly fall asleep. The trip was scheduled to be about 8 hours long, as several stops were scheduled along the way. Heavy snowfall made the trip even slower. Yet 14 passengers and the bus driver said that Tedford was still on the bus when it made its last stop before Bennington. But when the bus arrived at Bennington, James was no longer on the bus. No one saw him get off the bus. All his personal belongings were still in the luggage rack, and an open bus timetable was still folded up on the seat.
What?
But James had simply vanished. Oh yes, the date of this disappearance, December 1st, 1949, exactly 3 years after the disappearance of the college student Paula Jean Weldon.
Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Well, evidently, Bernie Sanders isn't the only unusual occurrence in Vermont. Okay, now don't get mad. We picked on Richard Nixon earlier. We can pick on Bernie Sanders a little bit, too.
Okay.
So you can make it out of the town.
Evidently.
Okay.
That's like, is it aliens? No.
I don't know, but 5 disappearances and possibly 6 all in one tiny area in a wooded area of Vermont.
That is
Very
crazy.
unusual.
Portals.
This next story is a bit similar to that of Bobby Dunbar in that it's about a missing boy that was found years later, but not really. This case was even more twists and turns. It also mentions briefly some very adult topics, so listener discretion is advised. Nicholas Barclay was reported missing from his San Antonio, Texas home on June 13th, 1994, when he was just 13 years old. He had been out playing basketball with his friends when he reportedly called home to get someone to come pick him up.
Of course.
He spoke to his older half-brother, Jason, who told him that his mom was asleep and he wasn't going to wake her up, and he was busy, so he told his brother, Nicholas, to just walk the 1.5 miles home.
Yeah. It's
Nicholas
mile
never
and a half.
made
You
it.
can do that.
Right, but Nicholas never made it home.
Now, how old was he again? 13?
13.
13,
He was
right.
a very old 13 years old, though.
Okay.
From the beginning, the police labeled Nicholas as a runaway, and it wasn't hard to see why. The Barclay family was quite dysfunctional, with the police having been called to the house several times before.
Yeah.
Nicholas had also run away before, and even at the age of 13, he had an established juvenile criminal record for stealing and breaking and entering. He also had a couple of tattoos.
Yeah, well.
It was surmised that he had run away this time because he was in trouble and about to possibly be put into a juvenile detention facility that summer that he did not want to go to.
Yeah,
okay.
understandable.
A missing child case had been opened, but there wasn't much development in the investigation. That is until 3 months later on September 25th when Nicholas's older half-brother, Jason, called the police and said he thought he saw Nicholas trying to break into the family's garage. He said that Nicholas had fled when he realized his brother had seen him. The police did search the neighborhood, but ultimately decided that they didn't believe Nicholas's brother had in fact seen him.
Oh,
And neither did their mother. Their mother didn't believe it. Without any further information coming in, the case went cold. But then, in October of 1997, 3 years after
3 years
the
later,
disappearance,
okay.
yes, so Nicholas would be 16 at this time.
Yeah.
Police in Spain received a very strange phone call from a man at a youth shelter.
In Spain.
In Spain, yes,
Okay.
all the way on the other side of the world.
Okay.
He said there was a boy living there at the shelter claiming to be the missing boy, Nicholas Barclay. The boy claimed he had escaped from a child sex ring operation where he had been held and abused for years.
Wow.
Okay.
A Barclay family member flew to Spain, identified the man as Nicholas, the young man as Nicholas,
Right.
and brought him home to the family who welcomed him with open arms.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Nicholas's
Kind of?
Well,
Oh, wait,
Nicholas's
forgot.
mother and
They're
sister were
dysfunctional.
certain that they
Oh,
had
okay.
Nicholas back.
Yeah.
They were certain.
But the brother.
But other family members, including an uncle, they were not so sure. Now, the brother was kind of ambiguous about it. He just wasn't into it.
Well, there's a lot of difference between a 13 and a 16-year-old. You change a lot during those
That's
years.
true. That's
Having
very
taught junior
true.
high, I know that because I see people a few years later and I can't. They come up to me, hey, you remember me? Oh, yeah. But I don't really.
State your name.
Yeah.
However, this young man claiming to be Nicholas had dark brown hair and dark brown eyes, whereas Nicholas had blonde hair and blue eyes.
Oh.
Really?
And
What about the tattoos?
This new guy, he had the tattoos.
Oh.
He did have the tattoos. And this young man spoke with a distinct French accent. When confronted with this information, the young man stated that his eye color had been chemically changed by his captors, and he refused to provide a blood sample for DNA or to have his fingerprints taken. He also refused to name his abductors. Now, the family didn't care.
a little
They
bit
were
strange,
sure that this was Nicholas. The authorities
No.
were not so convinced.
Right?
Yeah.
A 1998 court order put all the speculation to rest when DNA was ordered to be collected, and the man was determined to be 23-year-old French citizen Pierre Bourdin. Bourdin seemed to be a pathological liar.
Sounds like it, yeah.
who was well known to the authorities. He had a criminal history in Europe and had used many aliases. After being exposed, Bourdin made several contradicting statements about Nicholas, saying that he had actually known Nicholas in Spain and that the boy was alive. He later claimed that he had proof that the boy was deceased. And then he said he had never met Nicholas at all. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, more than 3 times what the sentencing guidelines suggested, because of the harm and emotional
toll.
distress that he caused the family.
You pathological liar like that, really.
But what happened to Nicholas? What
Right.
actually happened to Nicholas? It remains a mystery to this day, but the police suspect the family of being involved, particularly because of their eagerness to accept Bourdin as their missing boy in spite of the glaring inconsistencies in his story.
Yeah.
And I watched a documentary on this. I didn't write it here, but Bourdin he went online and searched up missing boys, picked one, and decided that's who
I'm
he was
him.
going
Who's
to
going to be
be.
today?
Get me out of
And
here.
he actually went and got the tattoos
Wow.
that it was
wow.
noted in the missing child report.
Yeah.
Um.
Ugh.
Now, Nicholas's mother was known to have an addiction to heroin at the time of the disappearance.
Right.
His half-brother Jason was considered a suspect by the police. He developed an addiction after the disappearance and died of an overdose in 1998. His death was after Bourdin had been brought into the family home, and it stirred up all of the missing
Emotions.
person's
wow.
case once again. But with his death, the investigation stalled, and the whereabouts of Nicholas is still an unsolved case. And I got my information from Wikipedia, and I think I've mentioned this place before, the Charlie Project, which is an extensive website on missing people.
Wow. Well, now this next one is a really strange case of 5 missing persons, and it comes to us from historymysteries.com and also from mauinews.com, M-A-U-I, as in the island in Hawaii, because this is a Hawaiian story. February 11th, 1979 was a beautiful day in Hawaii.
Aren't they all?
Well, I would imagine most days probably are. But this day was especially fine. There was hardly any wind, and the surface water was as smooth as glass. On the island of Maui, 5 buddies decided that the weather was just too nice to waste away working on their construction job,
Well, yeah.
so they decided to sneak off and go fishing instead. These gentlemen, Ralph Malachini, age 27, Peter Hanchett, age 31, Scott Moorman, age 27, Benjamin Kalama, age 38, and Patrick Wosner, age 26, left the town of Hana on a 17-foot motorboat that belonged to Malachini's twin brother. The boat was named the Sarah Joe, after their mother and father. Conditions couldn't have been more perfect mid-morning when the quintet set out from the Hana boat ramp. The sky was clear, and the sparkling blue water contained barely a ripple. Evidently, the gentlemen didn't look at the weather forecast and were unaware that a large low-pressure system was bearing down on the islands. It's unknown exactly what the men faced on the boat, but in Hana Bay itself, the winds were blowing between 40 and 50 miles an hour by 1 p.m., and by the evening were nearing hurricane force.
Oh, my goodness.
Benjamin Kalama's wife, Ulu, called the police after the men didn't return by mid-afternoon. The police notified the Coast Guard, and a search began. Several volunteers with fishing boats and other types of vessels joined the search. One later reported that the storm was so fierce that their boat was completely vertical in a 40-foot wave. Now, that's quite a wave, isn't it? The Coast Guard called off its search after 5 days. Members of the Hannah community continued searching for any sign of the 5 men or the boat. Days and then weeks passed with no trace of them. The search was officially called off, but fishing boats and pleasure cruisers continued to ply the waters around Hannah, hoping to spot something. One of these local volunteers who was on the search was a marine biologist named John Naughton. And this is where the story takes a weird twist. Almost 10 years later, after the Sarah Jo went missing, John Naughton, I said like he was a marine biologist, he was leading a research team exploring the Marshall Island chain some 2,200 miles southwest of Hawaii. On September 10th, 1988, while sailing along an uninhabited coral atoll called Taongi, he spotted an abandoned fiberglass boat on the coastline. Upon investigating it further, he noticed it had numbers that were consistent with Hawaiian boat registration numbers. His mind immediately went back to the Sarah Jo.
Oh, wow.
Then a member of the landing party noticed about 100 yards away an odd pile of stones with a makeshift cross fashioned from driftwood inserted in the top. Closer investigation determined that this was a shallow grave that had been dug in the coral and covered with rocks. Brushing back the rocks, a human skeleton soon appeared. But there was something odd about it. As they examined the grave closer, they saw blank pieces of paper, about 3 inches square, resting on the skeleton.
Okay.
All the paper was loosely stacked, like in an unbound manuscript or a book. And in between each sheet of paper was what Naughton would later describe as tinfoil. The stack was roughly 3/4 of an inch thick, but the biology team could not imagine what the purpose of the papers could be.
Wait, me and Phil are looking at each other like, where is this going? Okay.
The 4 men collectively decided that any further excavation of the grave might be disrespectful. However, they did take the skeleton's jawbone with them. Naughton supposed that the skeleton might be one of the missing men from the Sarah Jo, and that the badly weathered boat might be the Sarah Jo itself. When they returned to Hawaii, Naughton turned over the jawbone to the Hannah Police Department. Forensic tests showed that the jawbone belonged to 27-year-old Scott Moorman. With this part of the mystery solved, there was still no sign of the other 4 men, or an explanation about who buried Scott and placed those paper foiled stacks on his body. While there's no solid answers, there is one plausible theory. You see, in China, as well as in Taiwan, it's customary to stack paper interspersed with gold or silver leaf onto the bodies of the buried loved ones. The items are placed in the casket at the time of burial as an expression of good luck in the afterlife. As the Marshall Islands are some 2,200 miles from Maui, it is likely that Scott Moorman tied himself to the boat in the storm after seeing his buddies get knocked overboard. With little to no supplies, he might have survived the storm, but was then adrift in the vast Pacific Ocean. Most likely he died in the boat, which drifted onto the atoll. Fishermen from China or Taiwan, who may have been fishing illegally, likely came across the boat, and then Moorman's body in the boat. They likely buried him on the atoll using their paper foil tradition, and then placing the cross over the grave, which would have been more of a nod to the sailor's likely origin in Hawaii. If they had been fishing illegally, they would not have reported what they found or did. In the early 1990s, the Coast Guard found and retrieved the Sarah Jo from Taongi Atoll and returned it to Ralph Malachini's twin brother Robert back in Hannah. Today, it sits next to the entrance to his driveway as a reminder of his brother and the other 4 men who died and did not return.
Oh, wow.
That is really interesting.
Strange story, yeah.
Well, we're going to end things on a lighter note with a couple missing persons cases that end well.
Yay!
This next story happened in August of 2012 in Iceland when a woman on a tour bus was reported missing. The other tourists on the bus noticed that the woman, described as, quote, Asian, about 160 centimeters, in dark clothing and speaks English well, got off the bus at one stop and never got back on. No one apparently knew her name, but they were concerned, so a large search was organized and went on throughout the weekend with no sign of the woman being found. Several of the tourists, concerned for their fellow traveler, volunteered in the search as well. And when one of those volunteers started thinking and putting two and two together, she approached authorities with the idea that the missing woman may in fact be herself.
Oh.
You see, she matched the general description, and she did leave the bus at that particular stop and then changed her clothes before returning to the bus, where her fellow tourists apparently didn't recognize her. The search was called off, and the woman finished her Icelandic tour, then returned home with souvenirs, including the funny story of how she joined a search team to look for herself.
Hey, can you help me find me? I'm not sure where I'm at.
I'm trying to find myself.
I got my information from yahoo.com/news and grapevine.is/news.
You know, I was in Iceland in 2022, and it's beautiful, but it is wild, and it's not roped off and user friendly.
I can imagine
places. It's just wild as a foreign planet almost.
I would think it's kind of like Alaska, right?
Yeah, very much so. Maybe even wilder. But man, it's gorgeous and it's a great experience. But yeah, I can see how people could wander off and get lost there easily.
Well, it's on my bucket list to visit, but not get lost. This next story is, it's interesting. Having a loved one be diagnosed with dementia and then watch their mental state slowly decline is sadly a reality for a lot of people.
Yes.
Terrible.
The situation is worsened when that loved one tends to like to wander off.
Mm-hmm.
It happens so frequently that here in Texas, we have what's called a silver alert.
Yeah.
Similar to the well-known Amber Alert, that's called when a child goes missing. The Silver Alert is called when a senior citizen, most often with dementia, goes missing. And other states have similar alerts.
Right.
Well, Robert McDonough, or Bob as he was known by family and friends, was suffering from dementia when he wandered off from his home in May of 2013. 16 hours after the missing persons case was filed, a news crew was setting up on the road in front of McDonough's main home, to this home in the state of Maine.
Yeah, state of Maine.
To provide updates on the overnight search where dogs had been brought in but had not found him. Before going live, but while the camera was recording, an elderly man walked out of the nearby woods to the news reporter to see what the fuss was about. That man turned out to be Robert McDonough.
Hey,
What's everybody looking for?
What you guys doing here?
Authorities were called and McDonough was looked over, and in spite of being a bit confused, he was determined to be in good physical condition, having suffered through a very cold night in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
He was returned home, the search was called off, and the news had a good story with a happy ending to tell for a change.
Well, that's good.
And I got my information from HuffPost.com, as well as the YouTube video. They have it out there on YouTube, and I'm going to put it...
Of him walking out of the woods?
Yes.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
It's interesting because they're setting up and everything, and they're talking, and the news anchorman, and then this guy comes walking up the street, and the anchorman's kind of looking at him like, you can see the wheels turning in his head.
Could this be?
That?
No.
Could it? No way. Yeah. So they have it all on camera.
Film.
And now it's time, boys and girls, for the Trivia Challenge.
All right, time for that Trivia Challenge once again. You know how this works. Like and follow our Facebook page at Remnant Stew Podcast. Like and share this episode post. Put your answer to the Trivia Challenge question in the comments of that post. The first individual to do all of that will be the winner and will be mentioned in an upcoming episode of Remnant Stew. Our Trivia Challenge is also open to school kids. If you are a teacher and your class listens to Remnant Stew, we challenge them to answer the Trivia Challenge. Oh, I know it's summer right now, but you might be looking for something to do. Oh, you might be back in school by the time we air this episode, actually. Some places start early. Anyway, send us the answer through an email at staycurious@remnantstew.com. If your class is the first to answer, we will send a care package to the whole class. What a way to start off the school year.
Well, here we go. What is the name of an Ontario man that was found living only 80 miles away from where he went missing 30 years later, living a new life after a supposed head injury? And what circumstances led to him being found?
That's pretty interesting.
Hey, that's kind of cool. A little weird. Hey, thanks for spending some time with us. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Remnant Stew Podcast. You can also send us an email to say hi or to suggest a future topic for one of our upcoming episodes. Send it to staycurious@remnantstew.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Amen.
Remnant Stew is a part of Rook and Raven Ventures and is created by me, Leah Lamp. Dr. Stephen Meeker and I research, write, and host each episode along with commentary by our audio producer, Philip Sinquefield. Theme music is by Kevin MacLeod with voiceover by Morgan Hughes. Special thanks goes out to Brandy Nichols, Judy, Meeker, and Harbin Gould.
Now, before you go, please hit the follow button so you won't miss an episode. Head on over to Apple Music and leave us a review. We love reading those reviews. Share Remnant Stew with your friends, family, and Jimmy Hoffa if you happen to run into him. Until next time, remember to choose to be kind and always stay curious.